welcome to the next video in the series of comparative advantage. Here we're going to tackle why and how do countries actually benefit from specializing in their comparative advantage. This is, again, probably a bit extension, but it's really interesting and I think it's really helpful and pretty cool, and I think it will help add to your understanding. Here we have a table. It is the same example as we looked in the previous video, so click the link to the previous video if that would be helpful to you and you haven't watched that. So here I have the maximum production possibilities, and I've got country A, country B, and they're making the exact same goods that we just saw. So they're making pens and pencils, and they can make 40, 4, 30 and 20. And we've seen what that actually means. We know that it means they can make either 40 pens or 4 pencils, dedicating all their resources, or it means making 4 pencils and no pens, or any combination of those. That's all in the other video, so take a look at that to help you refresh. I've also written down the opportunity costs, which we found from that other video, and this is the same information, nothing's changed. In that video, we found that A is going to specialize in pencils. And why was that? So in the production of pencils, it turned out that A could make them for a lot cheaper. It cost them only 10 pens, whereas B, it cost them 15 pens. So A had to sacrifice fewer resources to make a pencil, and that's why A should specialize in pencils according to this theory. At the same time, B should specialize in pens. And why was that? Because B only had to sacrifice 1 divided by 15 pencils, which is lower than 1 divided by 10 pencils that A faces. So that's a recap with that. And when it means they specialize, I have this chart. A only makes pencils. So here I have a pink dot for A. And we've just said that A should make only 4 pencils from the table we've just seen. Country B can make up to 30 pens. And again, that's from that table. The thing with specialization is you don't make anything else. You have decided to make only what you have comparative advantage. So this theory is really going to rely on trade for them to be able to acquire the other good that they don't have. And here's where it gets really cool and really interesting. So for each country to want to sell the good that they make, so country B is going to have to sell pens, and country A is going to have to sell pencils. They have to both be selling them for a profit. And what that kind of means, they have to sell them for a price that covers their opportunity cost. That's more than their opportunity cost. Otherwise, why would you want to sell the good that you've just made? But at the same time, they were only going to sell the pens and the pencils if they can acquire the other good. Otherwise, there's no point in selling the good in this simplified economy. So B is only going to want to buy the other good they don't have. So buy pencils if they are offered a cheaper price, then they can make it by themselves. Otherwise, they're just going to make it by themselves because that will give them a better deal. And at the same time, A wants to sell pencils, but they only want to buy pens again if it's a really good deal for them. And that's going to mean acquiring pens for cheaper than what it would cost them to make. So definitely write down these two buy and sell conditions. They are crucial to understand what's going to happen next, and it's going to be really interesting, really cool. Okay, so here I've applied these two conditions to the costs that we've actually found for these countries. We've done all the hard work. So this is just kind of putting in the conditions. So I've said that A sells pencils. Remember, because they were the only ones making pencils. but they would only be willing to sell it if the price of a pencil made them a profit. So that meant selling the pencil for a price higher than the cost for A to make one pencil. So the price of a pencil has to be greater than 10 pence. Otherwise, they do not want to sell their pencils. A, at the same time, wants to buy pens, but they will only buy it if they get a better deal than making it by themselves. So right now, A, if it wanted to, it could make a pen for 1 in 10 pencils. So somebody will only convince them to trade if they can offer them a price cheaper than what they currently have to pay to make a pen, 1 in 10 pencils. And that's the buy and the sell conditions for A. And I've done the exact same thing for B, where we follow the exact same condition and we find the price of pens has to be greater than 1 in 15 pencils. And the buy price of pencils has to be lower than 15 pence for B. But that's just me looking at the opportunity cost table combined with the buy and the sell conditions that we've just found. And here's the really interesting, a bit difficult maybe, but really interesting. I've written below here that for trade to work, each country needs to want to sell their goods. But they also need to acquire the other goods, which basically means we need all of these 4 conditions to work all the time. Otherwise, these countries don't want to trade, because otherwise they could be better off just making pens and pencils themselves. So what I've done next is I've taken the conditions that tell us what the price of pencils need to be. So the price of pencils I know needs to be higher than 10 pence. But at the same time, country B needs the price of pencils to be lower than 15 pence. As a result, we get the price of pencils has to be benefiting both of them, because it's got to be a win-win for them to trade. And at the same time, the price of pens has to be both greater than 1 in 15 pencils or smaller than 1 in 10 pencils. And we have to meet both of these conditions. Both of these things have to hold. Otherwise, trade doesn't happen. It won't be in their interests. The countries have stated that they are happy to sell the goods that they have specialized in, and they've already stated the buy prices that they would be happy in. So we need to find a trade deal. We need to find a deal that meets condition 1 and condition 2. And here's where we have to do a little bit of maths. One way to solve the maths is find the midpoint. I guess it's a bit logical that usually to start in terms of negotiating a trade deal, the most one likely to work is something around the middle. So that's what I'm going with here. This strategy to work out what's happening, and again, this is probably extension. So I found the midpoint of that inequality. So remember this inequality 1 when we were looking at the price of a pencil? Price of a pencil had to be between 10 pence, 15 pence. So I went for 12.5 pence. I went for right in the middle, thinking that that's the one most likely to work, at least for now. Okay, so I know it meets inequality 1 because it wasn't between the 15 and the 10. But then I also need to check if it works for inequality 2. And just to be clear, I'm not making a new exchange deal. I'm going with the same one. It's still 1 pencil, 12.5 pence. But for me to check if it works for inequality 2, I need to phrase it in terms of a pen. So I'm going to take the same deal, the same 1 pencil, 12.5 pence. I'm not changing that. I'm just going to phrase it in terms of 1 pen. So here I've got written out how this is going to work. So to phrase it in terms of 1 pen, write out the exchange rate and divide it by 12.5, both sides, to get it down to 1 pen. And then you can see that 1 pen means it's going to trade for 1 divided by 12.5 pencils. And unfortunately, you guys know the story, you know it's going to work, but let me show you why. 1 pen had to be between 1 and 10 pencils or 1 and 15 pencils, and this is nicely working out too for that second deal. Again, it works for inequality 1 and 2, and it had to work for both. So this midpoint method doesn't always work, but it's probably one of the most likely ones to work and a good place to start out with. And to just be so clear, is this just one deal? It looks like 2 different things because I'm going for 1 pen, 1 over 12.5 pencils, and I also phrase it in terms of 1 pencil, 12.5 pens. It's actually the same deal, just written in terms of the other good. So here we found one deal that makes country B want to sell their good and buy the other good, and country A want to sell their good and buy the other good too. So it's going to work. These countries are going to want to trade with each other because they are both in this win-win situation. That's what I've written down here. So once you have a trade deal where each country is selling the good for more than it cost, and we saw how that worked, and buying the needed good for less than it cost them to make, trade is going to allow them to achieve a higher PPF. And this is the really cool thing about this video again. We're going to see how the countries are both going to be better off because they've had, they've had the opportunity to sell the good that they had specialized in for more money and buy the other good for cheaper. So let's see this happen. These are my sketch lines. I'm going to delete them for now. And I've got a key there showing you this is the original PPF. And just to remember, country A originally could make 4 pencils and 0 pens, and that's what they specialized in. They just wanted to make pencils. So even though they could have accessed all that PPF, because they specialized, they chose to only produce on the dot. And the same with country B. Country B specialized only in pens, chose to produce only 30 pens and no pencils, even though their original PPF would have enabled them to achieve this. So we have the situation where country A has 4 pencils to sell because they have 4 pencils and they have no pens, and they probably want some pens. If they sold all their pencils, they know they can get 12.5 pens for each pencil. We'll give them 12.5 times 4 pens, which is 50 pens. So country A is going to now be able to access at a maximum 50 pens. That's their new PPF. That's really cool. So this trade win-win deal system has made country A better off. So let's try this for country B. Country B had 30 pens to sell, and each pen could get them 1 divided by 12.5 pencils. So 30 times 1 over 12.5 pencils gives them 2.4 pencils. And so country B is going to be able to access around here in terms of pencils, which is what I had sketched kind of in the beginning. And that's their new PPF. So it's really interesting. This specialization and comparative advantage has made both countries better off because both of them have had this shift in the PPF. So that's going to mean more economic growth, more productive potential. If you notice, this is a common trick, by the way, the PPF doesn't shift parallel. It shifts from the good that they have sold. Now, that makes sense because they're only able to acquire goods based on selling those 4, so they can't get any more than that. So you get a tilted shift there, tilt there. It's not a parallel one. That's one thing to remember. Another thing to see, and this is really interesting, is that the gradients of that new PPF and country B's new PPF will be the same. And that's because they face the same trade deal. So here's a super cool conclusion. Specializing in comparative advantage and trading makes both countries better off as their PPFs shift out from the good they have specialized in, and the new PPFs have the same gradient as they face the same exchange rate. Since specializing in trading can make countries better off if they find a suitable trade deal, and it's a key theory to explain why countries trade. So this diagram is a gains from trade diagram. This is a really great one. It's really difficult. Look at all the steps that we've had to work through to be able to really understand and really be able to explain what's going on. So in a essay situation or something, this gains from trade diagram, again, you would shift the PPF from the good that they've specialized, and you'd kind of shift it with a tilt. And you can do that for both countries. One more thing to watch out for is there's only 4 pencils in this system, and there is only 30 pens. So I kind of was wrong to say they could access up to 50 pens. That's not really realistic because country B isn't a large enough producer. So country A will actually only be able to access up to 30 pens and no more. That's a limitation of this theory. You know, you can specialize, you can trade, but you might not be able to sell all the pencils for as many pens as you could have achieved because maybe there's just not that many pens available. So that's something to think about. Okay, hopefully that was really useful and informative. Let me know in the comments if you'd like anything else explained relating to comparative advantage or any other question. Thank you very much. Bye!